Max, welcome. It's an immense pleasure to speak with you again.
Lovely to be talking to you again, Andrew. Yeah, really good.
Max, before we dive into your latest book, Super Adaptability, can you give us an overview of the key passions that fuel your work today and the journey that led you here?
So, key passions. I like to understand how things work, and I guess big love. I would say those two things. Probably. I like to understand the intricacies of anything. If I have, this sounds like humble brag or something, if I get some extension built in my house, I want to understand how it all works, the detail. Even as a kid, if I had an abscess lanced, I wanted to have a look at what was happening and understand it underneath. So I love understanding how things work all the way back for pure curiosity. It's very satisfying to me, or perpetually unsatisfying. So I keep going, uncovering more. And then, big love, that just came to mind, really, that idea that we really can love each other. We really can discover that self-love to our friends, our family, but much wider than that, existence, I guess. Those things drive me. So I'm not religious, but I came from a religious family. But the thing that stuck with me was just the idea of love one another, that this was epic shit, if we're allowed to say that on here, that was the good stuff. That if we just could see that, that's where all the good stuff comes from. And even though it can look like the bad is victorious too often, I think they just skim off our goodness. Not to say that I'm some perfect person, but just we're trying to be decent to each other and grow. So big love and curiosity are probably my drivers. And that led me to, not surprisingly, art and science and psychology and the academic route, but also the totally non-academic life as I tried to explore both of those. So I'm still on the underground music scene, but also still with clients, corporate, ambitious, really real world, trying to do things, but still driven by those two ideas.
I love that. I have here a book, Super Adaptability, which is a masterpiece and it is gigantic. When I received it, I was like, wow, this must have taken you forever to write. Tell us about what inspired you to write it and how long it actually took you to finish it.
So I wrote a book many years ago called Adaptability, and in it I was asking more businessy questions, how to win in an age of uncertainty. So that was good. And I explored that through lots of case studies. And somebody came to me, a publisher, and said, why don't you publish a second edition of that book? That would be good. And I thought, well, I'm busy, I got lots on, but maybe I can just, knock out a 10% updated book with updated examples. And as I started to do that in really quite an efficient way, I kept asking this question, but really, how do humans adapt? Deliberately, I'm talking about, not just genetically. How we're one of the species that is capable of thinking about something before we do it. And therefore, most of our technological and cultural progress or history has come about because we think about a thing and then we do something differently as a result. And I started thinking about this, and the more I wrote it down, the less satisfactory my plan was for just updating Adaptability. And I thought, I've got to go all the way through. And I started running and dictating my ideas, and then I'd come back and I'd write them up. And I have a whole room full of the notes. Looks like some kind of crazy scientist thing. As I kept trying to loop round and understand what was it about humans that allowed them to either get trapped by their situation or, in my terms, rise above or transcend. How did they do that? And in the original book, Adaptability, I had something called the run loop. Recognize, understand, take necessary action, RUN. But I went into quite a lot more detail, as you will be able to tell, because I wanted to understand what the patterns were that underlay what I was saying. And when I say patterns, I mean actual behavioral patterns that we could see out there, exemplified by real people, who I describe as super adapters in the book, but also borne out by science and neuroscience and sociology and social psychology and history, and also through what I term logical patterns, as in, if a human has achieved this thing that has transcended a previous limit, if that's what we have done, necessarily they had to go through these steps. Can I describe them accurately enough that somebody could learn from that? And if I have achieved that through real world patterns and logical patterns, then I achieve what I wanted. And if you want an additional, I know I'm talking a long time, but I also wanted the book to be what I was writing about. I wanted it to be what I describe as a recursive loop, a loop that allows you to recognize that you're moving along your life, you're recognizing it, then you loop back inside and seek understanding, elevated understanding, and then you take action that takes you to a new level. And I wanted the book to be the thing I described. So for anyone who gets their hands on it, including you, you'd notice that it doesn't have a traditional table of contents. You can read it from the back and it works. It loops you forward so that every page that you've previously read is useful to each subsequent idea. And it appears to be what it did to me. And so far, what people are telling me it's done for them. Not everybody's finished reading it yet, but that's the impression gained from people's sometimes life-changing experience.
Absolutely. When I was looking at all the stories that you were sharing from incredible individuals, I'll just mention a few, from Frida to Maya Angelou to Havel to Honda to Kusama, one of my favorite artists actually from Japan.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes. And seeing the description and all the research that you've done around this, I felt almost invincible that everything is possible when you're looking at some of the challenges of some of these individuals and the stories that you have shared in your book, and you outlined this loop process. I just find it so inspirational. And often humans may find it very easy to become victims of circumstances, victims of situations that they have not controlled. And rather than let that inspire them to new possibilities, I find that very, very sad when individuals fall in this victimhood pattern. And your book is actually something that I think would stop any victim in believing that whatever has happened to them, whatever trauma they've experienced, they can no longer go forward. So I suggest that maybe we begin exploring each one of the dimensions that relate to the loop. And I just want to share one quote that you have in your book that I really like, where you basically state that super adapters don't just cope when they feel overwhelmed or under pressure, they actually loop. So let's begin this journey to share with our audience this loop process, the 3 steps, and let's dive into each one of them for our audience to really become invincible and create a life that allows them to achieve not only greater fulfillment, but also have a positive impact on our world.
Absolutely. Let's go for it. What I'm enjoying already is it's the nature of the book, that it's fractal-like. Your listeners, I'm sure that many of them are scientific and interested in nature, but a fractal is a scalable pattern, the kind of thing that you'd find in a leaf, where if you go down all the way through with a microscope, you'd find that it's not quite capillaries, but its network of pipes are the same as the pattern of the leaves, the same as the pattern of the twigs and the branches and the whole tree. And this is a fractal-like process. And what I've loved talking to people, and already started here, is you start by mentioning it once, and the very next question that you're asked takes you back to that same loop, so that each bit of this conversation becomes more and more to me enlightening and also deeper as we go. So I love that you got that in. When I was writing this book or investigating it, bad stuff was happening in the world. Now, bad stuff is always happening in the world, I discovered as I dug in. And I thought I wanted to find people who maybe were born super adaptable, or who had had achieved super adaptability, or had it thrust upon them in war and in oppression, in all sorts of different situations, so that I didn't feel sorry for myself either. I could feel the pain, sure, but then say there's a way of picking up from even really close to the bottom. And we've all had loss, pain, and disease of varying kinds, and it'll continue. But that's human condition. Let's learn from people who've done better than I have and shown me the way. I felt inspired to spend so many months with their company.
Amazing. So take us through what recognition is all about in the process of becoming super adaptable.
Right. So in order to remember, I'm talking about deliberate adaptation, not just stuff that we happen to cope with. And I'm talking about the kind of adaptation where you don't just adapt to sort of fit in with something else that somebody wants you to do. You know, the kind of workplace adaptability where somebody just says, we've got a new job for you, you better do it. I'm talking about an adaptability where you make choices. And with Recognize, I broke it into initially 3 functions. Somebody told me this is like a software manual or a software program, the book as well, somebody from the software industry. So Recognize, I split into 3 functions, and they were to detect what's happening, to interpret what's happening, and then to decide what that means and what to do with it. And I asked the question for each of those, how does a super adapter do it? So we all detect things, but what would a super adaptive mind do about detecting something that leaves them in a better position than somebody who wasn't being super adaptive? What's the difference? How do they detect? How do they interpret? And how do they decide what that means before pushing it on to the next step in the process, which we can talk about later? How do they do each of those 3 things: detect, interpret, and decide?
So let's dive into each one of them and help us also understand the role of self-awareness in this process of recognizing, because it's not just about looking at as to what's happening in the outer world, but it's also about having the self-awareness to also understand what's happening in our inner world from an emotional perspective. So take us through each one of these dimensions: detect, interpret, and decide.
Yes, so if we take different stages of this, and there is a section of the book called I Am Your Super Adaptive Mind, in which I talk in the first person as your mind and describe what's happening at a neuroscientific level, but also a psychological level. Because you're very much, one theme of the book, or one thread, is metaplasticity. The idea that, again, so some people will know metacognition, meaning our ability to think about what we think about at multiple levels. So we are aware, I am aware that I'm thinking right now, and I'm aware that I'm thinking and doing things with you. That's metacognition, thinking about thinking. But there's also another core aspect of the brain, which is its plasticity, its neuroplasticity. Some of you will know, listening, about the idea of Hebbian firing, the idea of what fires together, wires together. What you continually think reshapes your brain, the actual connections, the nets and knots that make up your brain. I brought those 2 things together and said, if you've got metacognition and you've got neuroplasticity, and you bring those together, you've got what I've described as metaplasticity, meaning that once we're kind of aware of that, we can deliberately think our way into being a different kind of person, or at least some different aspect. We're constantly changing and rewiring. So if I can talk to myself and actually say, as you did earlier, maybe nothing is impossible, or maybe we never are defeated. I can talk my way into a brain that is better at looping that belief and bringing that belief to pass in the world. And I can even, and this is kind of cool, I think, from The Matrix, the sci-fi movie, to one I grew up in when I was a kid called Joe 90, in which somebody had these sort of electronic spectacles, glasses, which could update his brain. I realized that you would be able to semi-update your brain according to what you thought, but also whose thinking you borrowed. And that's an epic thought. That means that facing a particular situation, I can say, this is something that this person, some of who people are in the book, like Cavell, this person facing oppression from an awful authoritarian government, thought his way into changing his own country and his own situation. So that's lots of ideas, but neuroplasticity, your brain changes in the way that it thinks. Metacognition, you can be aware of that. bring those two things together, and you can copy the patterns that you find it in this book, which to me is kind of mind-blowing. If you detect as a super adapter, I found that what you're typically doing is not trying to process everything that's happening around you. You're not trying to process, because that's impossible. You're not trying to process what other people tell you is important, because that might be unhelpful. What the super adapter seems to do is to say, which bit of this pattern is helpful to me to move somewhere better? And that's a pattern that you will find all the way through these kind of 10 functions. But what a difference that makes. And my father is fond of quoting Tom Hanks. I don't even enjoy Tom Hanks, but he loves quoting him. He was in a wartime movie, and in the wartime movie, he's a lawyer, and he's helping, this is a true story, he's helping somebody to cross a bridge into the West. And at one point, somebody says to him, "Aren't you worried?" And Tom Hanks' character says, "Why? Would it make a difference?" And my father is very fond of repeating this. And this is super adaptive as a pattern. It's to say, sure, stuff is worrying, but once you've been alerted to the threat, does that continued emotional debt, pain, cost do you any good? And the answer almost always is no. You don't become a sociopath or a psychopath because you stop worrying about something. You take the worry and you say, what can I do about this effectively? If you can't, you put it to one side and you try to find the bit of the pattern that allows you to do something next. And that means that you can be faced with chaos, seeming random craziness, and still say, which bit of this is helpful for me to get somewhere better or to help other people get somewhere better? Much more doable, because it stops us worrying about everything and achieving nothing. And I'm talking from a good person's point of view, who does, of course, care about all the really quite awful things that are happening. But in a sense, they've always been happening. Maybe we just realized they were. But what are we going to do about it that we can do? And that's true of interpreting something, detecting something. I think I tell the story in the book about myself and my wife out walking in the park, and it's springtime. This is a true story. The blossoms are falling down and they're covering everything in the park. Beautiful. And one of us, I forget who, drops their AirPod, a white AirPod, and it falls down onto the ground, and we can't see it because it's indistinguishable from all of those other white things. And we walk around the park trying to find it until one of us realizes that we should look this up, and we do, onto YouTube, and we find other people have faced this problem before. And what they say to do is to play the loudest sound in the world on YouTube, and that would come through the AirPod, and we would be able to hear it even at a distance. And that's what we did. We moved from the visual, which was totally unhelpful, to the audible, and that was totally helpful, and we found it within seconds. And if you see the difference in interpretation that would be adaptive and versus not adaptive, trapped to transcended, that's one of the ways in which this works. And I haven't even got to interpret or decide, but certainly in each of those stages, which I can go into as much detail as you wish, you are asking that question. How does this help? Not just what is true and what is not true in interpret, but what is the part of this that will be helpful for me to move on? Something terrible happens to you. Yes, register loss. Yes, register pain. Yes, register that you care about this thing. But can I interpret that in a way that allows me to metamorphosize, to become somebody, to do some good? You often hear it in the person who says, my child was killed and that was awful. Of course it was. But the good that did come out of it was that I did this. And it doesn't stop the bad thing. It doesn't belittle the bad thing, but it does allow you to move from being trapped to transcend it, interpreting it and deciding, you are free to choose what a thing means and which bit of it to pass on to the next stage of your cognition. So yeah, quite transformative once you start breaking it down into those bits. And that's just in recognize, the first of the 3 steps.
Yes, And the decision really brings back the power to us in terms of how we decide to move forward. It really is about agency, which we all have in any circumstance, in any moment. Let's jump now into understanding. Can you help our listeners grasp this concept as part of the loop so they can become also more super adaptable?
I certainly can. And by the way, because I made this the most beautiful book I possibly could make it, here's our understand section. So we've got this far, and I probably should show. So understand, again, there are 3 functions, and here is the 4th, the first of those. Rule 4, which is to be plastic fantastic. The 3 steps or 3 functions in understand are to model, to find the mechanism, and to modify that mechanism. So if I can go into it more detail. In order to deliberately change something, helps in this super adaptive way. It helps us to model the bit of the world that we have decided is important to change. We're recognizing, we're interpreting, we're detecting, interpreting, and deciding. And we're deciding, in a sense, what is worth investigating further. We're passing it up the line deliberately. And what we're doing is saying, we need to understand a bit more about how this thing works in order to modify it. So we want to model the bit of the world, not all the world, impossible, but the bit of the world, inner or outer, that we wish to modify. And what we want to do is to find the bit of that, the mechanism that allows us to best make that change. And that change can be so different. It can be at the micro level and the domestic level, which is not the same thing. And it can be right up there to huge political and global, but still, we've only got so much energy and so much time. And therefore, we have to find the smallest possible mechanism that we can modify in order to change the way the model works. And that's even back to Havel, again, Czechoslovakia. And Havel was a lover of absurdist theatre. That was his thing. And absurdists are great if you want to study them and look at them a little bit more. People like Samuel Beckett, people who could see that the world in some ways is a bit absurd. It's a strange old world. It doesn't always, one thing does not follow to another. People don't always make sense or almost never do. And absurdists show that to us. They model it so that we can recognize it and then change it. That's what they're doing, showing us the way the world works and saying, are you sure you want this to carry on that way? People like Kafka as well would probably qualify here. And what Havel did was model his world. And in this story that's just been shared by Mark Carney, of course, what he says is that if everybody pretends something is true, or I would say something is helpful, but if they pretend that the unhelpful is helpful, that the unfair is fair, if the totally untrue is true, then you stay trapped in what we could describe as man-made traps or mind-made traps. And yet he models it, he shows you the way that it could work, and then he shows you the mechanism by which it can be changed, admitting that the emperor has no clothes, that this is unfair, that this can change. And then he also showed us how to alter it, so that in Czechoslovakia, he showed them what a constitution could look like. And he spent the time with lots of other people writing a constitution so that when eventually the desire for revolution came, and in this terms, a revolution for freedom and sort of equality, they had a I suppose in software terms, a roadmap, a model which they could then follow. And the whole of the Understand chapters, the 3 chapters, are full of advice on that, but also real people and how they manage to loop differently in the model loop, the mechanism loop, and the modify loop. Because, of course, you could model a better world and not have the mechanism to change it. You could find the mechanism that needs changing, but you don't know how to modify it. It could break at any of those points, and each are necessary in order to improve anything. And in case anybody feels even the slightest bit overwhelmed here, I'd like to remind anybody listening or watching that everything good that you've ever achieved, every change you've ever achieved has followed the pattern I describe in the book. You've already done it. You're already looping. You've already looped. You just possibly didn't have a name to describe what you successfully did. So this is nothing that you failed to do before, but it is something that you could succeed in doing more often in the future.
Amazing. And as part of the understanding chapter, you talk about taking deliberate risks. How can we elevate the appetite for taking more risks in terms of what we do personally or professionally in order to open up more opportunities for us? And what tips would you have for our audience for them to become more courageous, more bold in the risks that they can actually take?
There's an amazing story in there about a politician in Liberia who really did not start off as an activist. But what she did, she started off, I would say, almost as a pretty traditional wife of a horribly traditional husband, is how I would describe it. Horribly traditional in the sense of was then domineering, expected her to do certain things, was drunk, was unfaithful, lots of those things. And what she somehow did was she started to test and develop her willpower by saying no to this situation. She didn't have all the answers, but she said no, first to him. And again, nothing I say here, it's so important, nothing I'm saying is suggesting that these situations are easy or that I have some, make it easy answer. I'm not. If the person listening to this is in this situation, I'm not saying it's easy. What I am saying is somebody who did experience this did find a way through. And one of the things she seemed to do was to build up her willpower the way we build up muscle mass or something, starting small and building it up until it became a pattern, a habit of willpower building. And that meant that first she eventually gained the willpower to leave, and she left and lived in her car with her children at first, and then she gained the willpower to go back home, which is strange, but back to another country, back to her home, and then the willpower to volunteer, and then the willpower to stand up to her father, and then the willpower to get to leave this organization and join one that would help to free particularly women in her country, until she was known as the general. And this was a peaceful general. They were wearing white. They were standing in fields in the baking sun. They were saying, we want a better world. Liberia wants a better world, a freer world. That whole set of steps was somebody being dissatisfied with their situation and saying the only way to get there is to insist. And I'm not going to be successful all the time, but I need to build my willpower until that willpower becomes normal, but also that I have a reserve of willpower. I've done it before. I can do it again. I will not be defeated. And of course, we all die in the end, but that's not defeat. The defeat described in this book is when somebody absolutely gives up and accepts something that they don't really want to accept, that diminishes them. So that kind of willpower. And I think all of the stories in there say, if humans have ever made any progress as individuals or as a species, it's because somebody was unwilling to submit to the previous limits, just out of self or system or situation, however big, however small. You're part of a long tradition. I'm part of a long tradition of people who have done that before we even had the ability to speak. So why not draw on that reserve? This is our heritage, I think, to reach higher. And that doesn't just mean some kind of interplanet travel. That means maybe peace on earth, or just improving our own frame of mind. A million ways in which we can transcend.
Love that. Thank you. So let's dive into the third dimension of the loop, the necessary action. Help us understand what that's all about and how we can take constructive action that propel us in the right direction.
I'm going to show again so that somebody knows, despite the fact that it has no table of contents, it is fairly usable as a 700-page book goes. So necessary action. So remember, in this mini class, we have recognized, actually I should mention that the very first chapter is called Rule Zero, which is to overcome overwhelm, which is like if you don't like long books, listeners and viewers, then just read that, because it's worth a book in itself. It's like a mini book hiding in plain sight. And the reason for mentioning that here is that first, of course, you've got to have at least a little bit of space to try all these other things. And sometimes that is just taking a deep breath. And it's illustrated by all sorts of people who've just taken the breath and in that moment found a little bit of space to start thinking about where to leave themselves in the future, rather than how to put up with the present. So you've recognized, you've understood, and now you're in necessary action, because you've modeled the thing, you've found a mechanism, and you've even thought about how to modify that mechanism to change something. And that could just be the way you and your child interact about a particular subject, or how something happens in work, or again, something huge and geopolitical, any of those things. And you found that. But recognizing and understanding, you haven't actually, well, they've changed your mind, maybe your belief. They've changed in that sense. But if they're to change something physical, you need to take it into necessary action. And necessary action is made up of, first, enacting the thing that you wish to modify, then finding the energy that you need to enact it, and then finally embedding the thing that you changed. Because you could see how any of that could not work if you forgot to do this. If you don't enact the change that you wish to make, nothing's changed. If you don't find the energy to enact it, you don't have the energy, and we've all felt like that. And by energy, I don't just mean your own personal energy, although certainly in my life, I've been overwhelmed at times and exhausted at times. Quite simply, without sort of details, right? My mother's rather ill at the moment. And the other day, there was a bed that needed to be moved. And I'm a fairly strong person, but one person wasn't enough to move it. So energy also means finding the 4 people I needed to help me carry this huge bed. So energy isn't just your energy levels, it's how to find the energy you need in the world, how to find the resources, how to find the help or the expertise, and then embedding the thing that you've sought to change, because you don't want it to sort of run back. You want it to stay fixed. You know, if you put up a shelf in your house, you don't want it to fall down like Muppets Christmas Carol, and it sort of falls down mid-scene. You want it to stay there until you want to change it again. So you have to learn to enact it, to find the energy to enact it, and then to embed it. You need each of those 3 stages as well. Again, in small and big ways. And in small and big ways, we do this all the time. What I've just described is people who've done it maybe at even better levels than you, and also so that you can recognize what you do successfully so you can do more often, and how I can as well.
Thank you for sharing the 3 dimensions of the loop. And in your book, you also talk about loop fails or wrong loops. Can you give some pointers to our audience in terms of how they can pay attention to what could go wrong, and what are the signs that can awaken them to realize that there's new action or something different that needs to take place in order for them to continue moving forward in an optimal way?
Yeah, very much. So if we track back, we have this idea that our behaviors loop naturally. We keep doing the same thing, or we do something and it leads to a different place, either a place we don't like, worse, or a place we do like, better. And the particular kind of loop I describe in this book, the run loop, is a deliberate, recursive loop. So unlike typical habit books that try to reinforce yourself to get back to the same place every day, learn to run, keep learning, keep running, keep running, keep running. I'm trying to get you to a new place, because that's what super adaptive minds do. That's what the book is about, a very particular kind of cognitive behavioral loop, a meta habit that you can follow. What I found going through it was that loop and the loops in the book fail in 3 really predictable ways. Either they are hyper, you go too fast, you do too much, it's too quick. Hypo, exact reverse, you go too slow, too little, too late. Or anti-loops. Actually, the speed has got nothing to do with it. You're simply going in the wrong direction. You're doing the wrong thing. And in each of the chapters, I take the time to go through how detecting something, how modeling something, how embedding something can go wrong in those 3 ways. So that when something is going wrong, you can say, well, it must be one of those 3. Which one is it? Which one is it most? And therefore, how can I reverse this or speed up or slow down? And then what I show, which is why it's so worth taking the time to learn these things in little and big ways, is that the exact loops I describe that work also are the antidote for when it goes wrong. So you only have to learn the loops that help you to adapt, how it goes wrong, and then just go back to the way it works, and you will solve it. And in so doing, you can really quite quickly figure out what the problem is. You're just going too fast, you're just going too slow, or you're going in entirely the wrong direction. And that's why speed is not helping you at all. You know, when you just work in the wrong direction and you feel it, you start to feel it and go, this is just, however much I work or however much effort I make, this thing is going wrong. Well, you know, you're in an anti-loop situation and no amount of effort is going to make it right. You got to actually modify the mechanism that you're in. So it all fits together in that way, which is very satisfying, really.
Indeed. What role does joy play for super adapters?
Well, quite apart from the fact that we should have a million years of it, which I think is highly important. What role? Let me describe it again. I'll do it briefly. I think what we've got here, we have the idea that people can be trapped. Here's the trapped line. This is current. Underneath this is sort of current behavior. And underneath that, that's where you're stuck. And then you've got the transcendent line. Above this, things are much better. It's up to you to judge that. Now, for me, and obviously for you, Andrea, we want to transcend to the point, or rise above to the point, that we do experience joy, that life is worth living, that life is good, that we have a thrill in the robin, or the flower, or the smile, or the satisfaction, that we experience joy. Well, if we are trapped below the joy line, then we have to be dissatisfied with that, essentially, and know that joy is kind of a minimum. I know there's trudging, I know there's grit, and those are all a necessary part of life, it appears. But they're not where you're aiming, surely. They're not where you're aiming, especially when history has shown us people who have found joy in really awful situations, certainly situations that you and I would consider awful, and yet somebody is experiencing joy there. But the counterpoint is there are people who have far more, I don't know how many billions you have, but have far more than I have materially, and yet still don't experience any joy or satisfaction. So the two things are not necessarily linked. It's how we live and how we think. And there's an example in the book, the artist that you mentioned earlier, who really, her whole life shows how it is possible to redraw and remold your life in a plastic way, to not accept limits, to redraw, to re-knot, to reweave, and leave yourself in a position that despite depression and despite bad things happening to her in her childhood and attacks and depression, she still found joy in her creativity, and through joy, a form of peace. For those who don't know, she eventually took up a residence in what you could describe as an asylum, I suppose, a mental hospital, an institution, and she lives there free to leave, is now a kind of multi-millionaire artist, a great modern artist, and yet has found a safe place and a place from which she can experience joy. You'll have to dive into the book to learn more. But that to me is thrilling, to not let go of the ability to find joy in little things and big things. And certainly for me, being miserable doesn't help me to achieve anything. And I have felt miserable, and it was pretty ineffective. So I'm not talking about false happiness or toxic positivity, but the pursuit of joy is not a distraction. It's there, it's possible. And if you were going to choose a guiding light, that's certainly one of those I would choose. A big love world in which there is joy.
Beautiful. And thank you so much for going deeper into the story of the Japanese artist Kusama. It's quite incredible what she has achieved. And she's one of the highest grossing female artists in the world, now at over 90 years old, which is quite incredible. And I've had the pleasure to even go see her museum in Tokyo. Yes, which is incredible, along with other exhibits around the world. And indeed, as you were saying, being in an asylum, you could think, wow, this is the end. But rather, she has not stopped.
I'm not looking. I was trying to find the bit of her story because it kind of seemed like something to share. But what I loved there is I was looking at it because I kind of felt like reading a part of it. But the idea that she left home having been, I won't go into all the details right now, but her father was not a good person and her mother was not kind, and she had some pretty horrific and harrowing experiences as a child. But she didn't stay fixed in that. She managed to just hold on to that one idea that I am free to move. And that's the thing, that she moved from there to New York. She moved from there to art. She met Warhol. She was, I don't know, semi-ripped off by him, if you like. She did so many things that said, I'm free and I will not stop until I find something better, some, if not safe place, some good place for myself. And I love that about her, and I love that for me, from her. Thanks. You've given me that possibility that however trapped I feel, there is a place that is better. I should keep looking.
Yes, and that freedom to move and to choose a direction in which we want to move towards is also about feeling enough. And when we hear so many individuals that are struggling with mental health issues or even self-esteem issues or not feeling enough, despite the pain, we have so much potential within us to do incredible things. I was wondering if, from your view, what is the difference between the individuals that are super adapters and those that are just like remain stuck? What is that single question that a person listening today may totally feel stuck, that can really allow them to find that tipping point that brings them towards the journey of being a super adapter?
By the way, for your listeners, here's the page that is about Kasuma here with her infinity nets. The thing I would say the most, the line would be, you are not stuck, you are metaplastic. I'm not stuck, I'm metaplastic. I'm going to change anyway. We call it aging. First we call it growth, and then we call it aging. But I'm going to change anyway. I'm going to alter all the way through my life. I'm plastic anyway. You're not stuck, you're metaplastic. You are of a species that metaplastic. You are, I wouldn't say designed, but you are constructed in such a way that stability is impossible anyway. And when you just keep that, if I had a tattoo, it probably would be, you're not stuck, you are metaplastic. It's in you. So are you going to look at your available resources? Are you going to check what you've got in your rucksack? Many games that I enjoy playing, you have to check your inventory. Video games, you check what's in your bag and you sort of open it up and say, well, what have I got? Survival situations, zombie movies, being on a desert island, being stuck at sea, all these things. They're all cases where you sort of check what you've got. I even remember situations in my own life when you didn't, financially something had gone wrong. So you were checking what's in my bank account, what's in my garage, what's in my attic, what can I resell, what can I repurpose, what skills have I got? And the skill that you've got, the key one, is metaplasticity. You can, I can, we can talk our way into a better mind. And through talking our way into a better mind, and I don't just mean a better mood, an actual better mind, upgrading our upgrade, we can then talk ourselves into a better place. There is always a third way, there's a third choice, there's a third space, always. And that's what the super adaptive grab hold of, that's the birthright, either because they were born that way, like Montessori or Picasso, they always knew that they could do something and remake the world and that the world was plastic, or because they achieved it. They just bit by bit kept improving, and suddenly they realized, again, the world is plastic, I am plastic. I can change the world, I can change myself. Or suddenly something thrusts it upon you. And many people have realized this. Something bad happens, something crazy happens, some opportunity happens, and you go, oh my God, I can actually do this. I did not know I was capable of this, and now I am. And I always shied away from it. So those really, it's in you. You got it. Why would you possibly want to let it stay undeveloped? That ability we have to recognize traps and transcend them. It's the most inspiring part of us and something we shouldn't waste.
Beautifully said. What is your view on the impact that AI will have on our capacity to be super adaptable?
Well, you could much to say about that. I guess as background, I should mention that I went to programming classes when I was a young teenager, adult classes, and then did a computer science degree, helped float a company that was in software. So this stuff is not new, it's all I'm saying to me. And this desire of humans to automate thinking, from the first pebbles that allowed us to conserve numbers all the way through to the abacus and language through to computers, again, is not new. This has a history, and I think it's quite reassuring and helpful to understand a bit more about that history, because it is a product, if you like, of super adaptive minds. You may not like what's being done with it. You may not like the people who own these different technologies, but they still have come about because humans have always wanted to transcend their limits. Big brains, big solutions, and sometimes then big problems created as a result. So I think that's, to me, very helpful to understand that process. You can't put it back in the box. It's like the mythologies of giving fire to humans. Once they have something, they will use that thing. So it's come about through human ingenuity and super adaptive minds, whether good or bad. Remember that the Nobel Prize, which is much in the news at the moment because of peace and war, came about because somebody invented dynamite, made themselves very rich, and then wanted to do some good with it. And dynamite is used to create good things and to destroy things. So that's what one side of it. It's part of us and our species. The second one, I suppose, really roughly, is to say human in the loop. Human in the loop is a term that AI people use, sometimes to mean when our computers and AI don't work, we will need to use some humans, but begrudgingly. There's a kind of unwelcome intrusion of humanity into their mechanical world. I would say the entirely reverse of that would be better, to view humans as always being the drivers of what is good for humans, and us to view our tools as what our tools are, never our masters, never their slaves. And that means, I think, to some extent, having a perspective of where it's coming from and what it should do or not do, and not allowing ourselves to fall into a false binary of it is bad or it is everything. It is neither bad nor everything. It is a tool that it would be worth understanding, so that we understand its likely impacts, where we can use it, what we should block and what we should not block, rather than either holding our head in the sand or head in our hands, or just jumping into it thinking that this is some kind of god and that everybody who sells AI understands everything about their own products, which is a lot of answers, but we shouldn't allow it to take over our thinking. But it can certainly, I didn't ever think using a calculator was a cheat. It could help, but it's also worth learning to multiply on your own. And the stuff that, as if you ask any AI, its limits are where we start. Creativity, love, judging what matters and what doesn't, moving behind what it's learnt from. It can't do any of those things, and it never will be able to, because it can only learn from the past. So I think it's going to doubtless do some terrible things, but also doubtless we can use it to do many wonderful things that have never been done before, including, I think, refinding our humanity. This is not the end.
If there would be a challenge that you could give our listeners for the coming days or this coming week, what would that challenge be?
I suppose it would be to start recognizing that limit line, to recognize, to see that the limit lines in your life that you're not satisfied, see where they are outside of yourself, in your system, in your situation. Start recognizing some of those and just noting themselves to you on a little piece of paper, just a line with the limit line, what's above it and below it. I think maybe just learn the simple recognize, understand, and necessary action loop. It's scalable, like I said, and I've embodied it at various places. So it is to recognize that's what's happening, to understand, and then to take necessary action. Just a simple click. The reason that that's useful is, one, you just do it and suddenly you can breathe again. I know I've described it, but I don't really think I invented it. But as soon as I do it for myself, I think, hey, I found myself again. I can feel I've created some space. If you can do that, then you can become more sophisticated at using it. Just pause. Okay, recognize, understand, necessary action. Am I going too fast? Hyper. Am I going too slow? Hypo. Am I going in the wrong direction? Click. And you'll find that you become better at looping in a direction you want, to getting above that limit line, giving yourself space to breathe, and identifying the limit you wish to get above, however small or big. So limit line, run loop, and then those 3 ways it fails. You can start applying that into your life, or just write down, I'm not stuck, I'm metaplastic.
Love that. Max, it's been an immense pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you immensely for everything you have shared, and let's create a world with more super adapters.
I think so. And let's help those people to understand who they already are. It's just who we are. I've just given a name to it. You don't even have to pick it. You have a super adaptive mind. Enjoy it. You get it only for so long, don't you? You're gifted by the universe, your body, for a period of time. That body includes a mind, and that mind can make decisions. Enjoy it for your sort of 70 and see what you can do with it. Wonderful things, I hope.
I hope so too. Thank you so much.